Welcome to our May Strength of Community chat. We host these chats each month from the Front Porch home office with hopes to inform, inspire, and connect with each other across our geographical divides. And we actually started doing this during quarantine as a way to connect with each other and combat isolation. But now it's kind of taken a life of its own. And I'm happy to report we have regulars now, which is very exciting. My name is Carmen, and I work in communications at Front Porch. And one of my favorite things about my job is that I have the privilege of hearing and collecting our residents' stories and sharing them with the outside world, which brings us to our topic for today. So today we are celebrating stories of our mothers and mother figures in our lives. And as we all know, a mother doesn't have to be your biological mother. It could be your grandmother, or maybe your big sister, a mentor, or perhaps even a father. And today we are focusing on the question of what we learned from our mothers. What were the values that they imparted to us? What wisdom did they pass down that made us who we are today? And joining me today is my co-host from the home office finance team, Marie Hayrapet. Hi, Marie.
Hi, Carmen. How are you?
Hello. Good, good. Thanks for joining us today. And Marie, can you tell us what you do here at Front Porch and start us off with a story about your mom?
Well, I'm here at the home office and I work in the finance department as the assistant corporate controller. But one thing I want to share about my mom is her faith and prayer life that she's had since I was a child. So I was born in Lebanon, and I came here when I was 4. I was born during the Civil War. And so when we came to America, it was just my mom and I. My father wasn't able to get a visa, so we came alone and across country, not knowing anything, not knowing anybody. And so I saw my mom during those years, spending a lot of time behind closed doors in her room on her knees praying. And I know that she really trusted in the Lord to get her through the many obstacles that we've gone through. And that's one of the things that really holds dear to me, is that she's always relied on her faith and prayer as her vehicle to get through life during challenging times. And I know one of the things when we first came to Glendale is she went around to find a church. That was her first thing. She wanted to find a church so that we can attend. And that's how I started attending church at a young age of 8. And she continues to still do that as in my adult years. And I have 2 children, and she continues to still use her prayer life as a vehicle. And I hope that as a parent, I can do the same thing and use that as I guide my children, in their adult years. So that is the story of my mom. So Carmen, I hear you have an interesting story to share about your mom. Would you like to tell us?
I would. So I also have a very strong mother also. If I had to describe my mom in one word, it would be fierce. Right now you're looking at a picture of my mother. She's a performer. She's a flutist and a composer, and this is her performing during the pandemic. Nothing stops this woman. She's amazing. She's a warrior. She has fought cancer. She has fought against the stigma of mental illness when my younger brother was diagnosed with schizophrenia. She's fought for social justice my entire life. But the story that I really want to tell about my mom is about my mother as an artist. So my mom is a musician and composer, as I said. And one of my fondest memories of her is when I was maybe like 5 years old. I drew a picture of a flower and she played it on her flute. And the interesting thing was that this wasn't odd to me at all. I grew up thinking that you could turn anything into music. And over the years, I've seen this magic trick of hers many times. She can turn a poem into music. She can turn a sculpture into music. Later, I even saw her turn cancer into music. And when my brother passed, she turned her mourning into music. So it's been a real lesson to me about what art can do and the power of art to transform. And it's something that has always inspired my own creativity as a storyteller, that there is life and beauty and poetry and everything if you just allow yourself to listen. So that is my story about my mother and what she has taught me. And now I would like to introduce our first guest. This is Donna from Kingsley Manor, which is our community right in the heart of Hollywood. And she is originally from Florida, and she moved to Kingsley right before COVID hit. And she has worked as a flight attendant and also a mental health nurse. And thank you so much, Donna, for being with us today.
Good afternoon, everyone. What I learned from my mother was the act of encouragement. My mother was born Maxine Eloise Marshall, May 9th, 1927. And she lived in a modest home with her sister, Emma, and Florence, her mother. She was a shy child. Florence encouraged her children, her daughters, to read books, play piano, and to have self-worth. Maxine, my mother, had a passion to play the piano, and at an early age, she started playing classical music. She was also an excellent student in school. At the age of 20, she met a young man by the name of John Bugg. She became very attached to him and loved him instantly. However, several months later, she became pregnant with me, and she approached him and told him that she was pregnant and that he was the father. He became furious and denied that fact, which made my mother very despondent, I've been told, and she just broke. And if it wasn't for my grandmother, she would have been in desperate straits. 2 years passed, and at the age of 22, she married Edward Wright, who, the funny story is that when they were children, they were in middle school together. And he would tell her, "I'm going to marry you." And this would upset her to no end. And she'd always say, "No, you're not going to marry me. I'll never marry you." And this went on and on and on. Well, they did get married. And when they got married, he wanted to adopt me, and he did. At a few years later, there were 5 children from this marriage, 2 of which were twins. That picture that you saw was my mother with my nephew when he was 1. He is now almost 50, so big change. She was a stay-at-home mom who taught her children the love of books, how to play the piano, and the importance of self-esteem. She encouraged them to do better in everything they did. After high school, I studied advertising and journalism. After a stint in that field, I decided it wasn't for me at all. One Sunday morning, I remember looking through the paper, the classified ads, and I saw an ad from Pan American World Airways for flight attendants. The qualifications were you must be bilingual. I only had 2 years of high school French and 4 years of Latin. You had to be able to swim because most of their trips were over the ocean. And you had to be a people person. That was the only thing that I felt I was qualified for at the time. But that's another story I'll get into. I showed my mom the ad, and she was more excited than I was. She encouraged me to contact Pan Am which I did. And I was interviewed by a lady over the phone who asked me many questions. And then at the end, she said, can you come to Philadelphia to be interviewed by our recruiters? And I don't know where it came, but I said yes. I went there and I was interviewed by a panel of 3 people. And at the end, they asked me if I could be in Miami in 2 weeks. Once again, I didn't know where that came from, but I said yes. And that was 1970. I worked for Pan Am until 1991, when they ceased to be an airline. My mother encouraged me throughout those 21 years and prayed that I would be safe flying, because that was another thing. I'd never flown before. And I got on that plane to Miami, you know, scared to death, but I went. My mother passed away in 1988 at the age of 61. I often wondered, and still do, how my mother would have encouraged me throughout the years after she passed in difficult times. That's when I asked my God to help me. And I recalled all the memories of my mom to learn how to encourage myself and others.
Donna, that was beautiful. I forgot to tell everyone to bring tissues. So, but thank you. That was a beautiful story. And, you know, how amazing to have, I mean, the fact that you had never flown in an airplane, and through your mother's encouragement, she empowered you to do that. I think it's just so incredible. Do you remember, was there a phrase that she used to say when you were like feeling a little too afraid to do something that would kind of encourage you to get over your fear?
She would say, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, which is a verse out of the Bible.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
also, how do you know you can't do it unless you try?
That is beautiful, Donna. Thank you so much. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So Marie, we have another guest coming up. Can you introduce our next guest?
Definitely. I would like to introduce Bill, who's a resident at Carlsbad by the Sea, and he's been there since 2019. Bill was a colonel in the Air Force and Space Combat, and he retired in 1987. After retirement, Bill ran a bed and breakfast in Alaska for over 20 years.
Thank you very much, Marie. Okay, my mother was born in 1900, and she was a Casey. She was Irish. And her family had emigrated after the potato famine and almost 300 years of not so kind occupation by the British. If you're interested in that story, read Trinity sometime and you'll find out why the Irish have some concerns about the British having their best welfare at heart. Anyway, her family came across, landed in the Isthmus of Panama, did not have the $25 to take the train, so they walked across the isthmus and boarded another ship and then came to San Francisco. And the family settled in the Salinas Valley in California. The area actually is called Long Valley, and that's where the Caseys were. I guess there isn't a woman in my life who isn't strong-willed. And as I want to say, I'm not sure whether it's in the genes, the environment, or the water, but they're all strong-willed, including my wife, my daughter, my granddaughters. So I grew up in that environment. But my mother married my father, and there's a picture of him. For those of you that may be longtime Los Angelinos, you may know the name. He was the ACLU lawyer for some 40 years and was the first labor lawyer in Los Angeles. The long and the short of it is the two of us grew up in very different worlds. He was an emigre, and his father was from Russia, from the pogroms at the turn of the century. So from both sides of my family, there has been long hardship and a desire to have children do well. And I think really my mother's work was to make sure that I succeeded. And indeed, when my mother turned me over to my wife, it was with some fear and trepidation that whether or not she was worthy of her son. But that's another story. My mother would say to me, "Be good, sweet child, and let those who will be clever. For have you ever noticed being clever takes more of what it takes than being good?" And the other thing she would always say to me, you can see that she was a very good-looking young woman in the 1920s in Los Angeles. And to be more than just an Irish lass, really there were only several opportunities. You could either be a teacher if you went to college, or you could become a nurse if you went through nursing school, or you could be a secretary. So my mother became a secretary and became a legal secretary and took great shorthand, which took a lot of what it takes. That's the reason I talk about strong-willed woman. My mother and father were divorced. My father was an intellectual that needed management, and that's the reason I think that he married my mother. And after about 7, 8 years, he decided he'd had enough management. So he went off. I knew him, but I never grew up with him. All the things that I know, I really learned from my mother. How to fix something, how to do some plumbing, how to do some electrical work. My mother was the practical, hard-headed woman who got things done. And she made a commitment to herself that she would not remarry until after I had left school and left California. And then she did. Actually, at that point, she married the track veterinarian for Santa Anita Del Mar in Hollywood Park. That's again, is another story. But my mother was a stalwart woman, of good Irish stock, knew where she was going, and didn't let anything get in her way. She ran a dress shop in Alhambra for the better part of 20 years. Never well off, but never poor.
Wonderful. Thank you, Bill. Thank you. And how has watching your mother sort of overcome her own hardship in her own life, how has that affected your own approach to parenting?
Well, I think my bottom line is bloom where you are planted. Whatever our Lord gives you, he gives you for a reason. And our task is to find out what those reasons are and to live the life as he would have us live it. And our children have progressed in that way. My son is a financial advisor for Edward Jones back in Iowa. Our daughter is a California teacher, but decided to homeschool, and in the Valley here, really manages 200 families that are homeschooling. And they graduate about 20 each year from the 12th grade in their homeschooling program. So our children have learned that life is not always easy, but if you persevere and you live in God's word, it does turn out well.
Great. Wow. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Bill. So we have another guest joining us today, Peggy, who is from Claremont Manor. And Peggy is actually an author. And you have to remind me, Peggy, the name of your memoir.
Peggy, Not Margaret.
Peggy, Not Margaret. Yeah, I remember it had a great title. So, and you've actually written a whole book about your family, right?
Yes.
Yes. And today she's going to share a story with us about her mom, who had, I think, a very unique approach to parenting, which I just found fascinating. Peggy, would you like to tell your story?
Yes, I'd be happy to. My mother, Dorothy Woods, was the first of 6 children born to Charlotte and Myron Woods, who was a grain elevator proprietor in Iowa. And he was the person who helped the farmers sell their corn and their animals to the stock market and so forth for the farmers. Very unusual job. My mom was a precocious child and the apple of her father's eye. She showed interest at the age of 3 in magazines that Myron liked to read. So he taught her to read. And she was ahead of classes in school throughout her lifetime. Dorothy skipped 4th grade and graduated at 16. After 2 years of college, she began to teach in a country school. Russell Doughton, my father, met Dorothy when she was 12 and he was 23. He was impressed with this very smart girl and waited for her to grow up. They married when she became 18 and she left teaching in school until she was in her 40s. As the first child of 8, I was my mother's first helper. This is a picture of my mother. I told my mother when the baby was awake, when it needed to be changed for the next 5 years. And then I became old enough to do a lot of that myself. In everything my mother attempted, she became an excellent doer. She played the piano and sang. Her family background on her mother's side was very, very musical. And so music was a very important part of her life. She asked my father to buy her a Singer sewing machine, and then she made everything her children wore except shoes, socks, and underwear. And I got my first coat in a store at 12 years old. Not only was she outstanding as a seamstress, she learned to can vegetables and fruits. Her mother never learned those kinds of things, so she could not have been taught by her mom. Her mother, who was French Canadian, lived in a convent, taken care of by nuns from the age of 7 to 14, and never saw her family during that time. So my grandmother could not teach her because she was not at home. Not only was my mother an outstanding seamstress, but she learned how to can vegetables and fruit. My father always wanted to make a big garden, and he did not like to see things be wasted. So he said, find out from my sisters who can how to do this so that you can can fruit for us, fruit and vegetables. And she taught all of her 6 daughters how to do that also. When we entered our teens, each girl was required to do all the food shopping and cooking of all the meals on a strict budget for 1 entire month. And I was the first one. When we had homework from school, we had to do it immediately after supper and could not go to bed until she had corrected it. As the first child in our family, I was trained to take care of the smaller children, how to sew, how to play the piano and violin, how to can fruit and vegetables, weed the garden, bathe the baby, and clean the house. Of course, I became a school teacher too. And my mother went back to teaching after my father had a heart attack and died at the age of 60. And she taught 30 more years. My mother lived to be 96 and was still driving at 93.
Wow, your mother gave you a lot of responsibility as a kid. had a
Yes,
lot.
you hardly know how much. When the seventh child was born, I was 12 years old. And I made the comment within the hearing of my parents, apparently, although I did not realize that was the case, that we were getting to have a very large family. And my mother said, well, there's something we can do about that. You can take the baby that was born last year and take care of that baby for me, and I'll take care of the new baby. And that's exactly what happened.
Wow.
She slept with me, I dressed her, I bathed her. Everywhere
Yeah.
we went, she held my hand. She was like she was my own child.
Wow. So did you feel prepared when you became a mother? For
Of course I did,
Yeah.
because my mother had taught me everything I needed to know.
Yeah.
She had made me in charge of taking the children to Sunday school and other kinds of things that she could not do on her own because there was always a new baby. So I was second in charge.
Gotcha. And how do you feel that this preparation has impacted you as a parent in terms of your own parenting style? I know that you've had your own challenges as a parent, and was there anything that your mother taught you that kind of helped you overcome those?
Well, I think she did a good job of teaching me, and I was apparently a good listener because I wanted to be just like her. And so I mimicked a lot of the things that she did.
Yeah.
And she was very open to me having activities and so on at school. She didn't want to cut me out of any of those things just because I had to help with raise the children.
Right. Yeah. And she had high standards for everyone, it sounds like.
Very high standards.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Peggy. I have there is a message from Mike, who's also on our communications team, to everyone. Does anyone have a story about someone in your life in the absence of your mother who had a mother-like impact on you? So we'll be opening this up to everyone now. So if you have a story that you want to share, or if you have questions for any of our featured guests, we'd love to hear them now. Bill.
Carmen, I'll give you a semi-humorous answer to the question you asked.
Okay.
Are there other mothers? And yes, men marry them. And the wife's goal is to make her husband perfect. So I advise men, so long as you don't become perfect, she still has work to do. But it's helpful from time to time to make small improvements so that she thinks there is still hope and she does not give up trying.
Bill, now you've told me the secret, and yeah, that's very dangerous knowledge, I think.
Well, actually, I also give a second piece of advice to young men, and I realize there are a number of women here, but you can take it for what it's worth, is that your wife will have women friends that have strange husbands, and you need to keep them close to you. Because as we say in Alaska, you don't have to outrun the bear, you just have to outrun your friend. And my observation in life is women compare husbands, and as long as you still tally up, you're probably all right.
Donna, I have a question for you. So your mom being the woman she was, what was some of the character attributes that she had that you took on as a mother yourself?
She was a great listener. She was a woman of God, which I looked up to her for that. During those 21 years of Pan Am, I became a great listener on the back seat of the jump seat, in the back or the front, and listened to many a story of heartbreak from other fellow flight attendants. What else? She was a great cook. I'm not a cook, wasn't a cook. She was a great baker. I took on that. She was just a powerful woman, one that I would have loved to fully been. she was a strong woman despite hardships during life. So that's it.
Thank you for sharing. That was very nice.
So do any of our participants here have an anecdote that they'd like to share about their mother, about what they learned from their mother, or maybe about a mother who was not actually their mother? Anybody have a story about that?
I'll share one.
Yeah, okay.
The story is told by my mother that she went to a show with two boyfriends, and one sat on each side and held one of her hands, which will give you some idea of who my mother was.
Definitely her own person.
You know, it's interesting. Everyone that's been talking talks about how strong their mother was. And I have just a little anecdote, and then I have a question for Marie. My mother had a presence, and all she would have to do is she would have her glasses and she would look over her glasses, and my brother and I knew, I mean, we knew that we were doing something we weren't supposed to do, or that she was not approving of something. And what I have found out now, much later in life, is that my friends also, they will make comments about, well, remember how your mother used to look over her glasses? And it was just kind of interesting. I too had a very strong mother, and she was my best friend. And I really can't say much more of this whole thing. I do need the tissue, Carmen. But I have a question for Marie, just interested in you growing up in Lebanon for 7 years, and your mother was strong as well. Was she typical to other Lebanese mothers and women in Lebanon, or was she kind of a unique being that way? Just curious.
Yeah, I mean, I think as far as like, you know, raising children and being a wife, it was similar culturally. You know, every woman at that time had certain expectations, but I think, you know, the one unique factor I think with her was just her faith, you know, because other people during the war would, you know, worry. I mean, they all worried, but they would worry, you know, because tomorrow there's no bread. People lost homes, you know, but my mom always just would say, we're going to be good because God is in control and he has this, and, you know, and he's not going to leave us or forsake us. So that's the thing that was different. But as far as culturally being a woman or a mother, she was very similar to the rest of those that were in Lebanon.
Does anyone have anything to share about like anything unique about your mother?
So when growing up, you know, my mom was first generation here in America. So a lot of things that were, you know, part of the American custom or just, it was not common for her. So as a high schooler or, you know, growing up, if I came home with questions that was unorthodox for her, like all of a sudden, you know, like I'd say, oh, Mom, there's a guy, he's cute, or Mom, can I go to prom? And it was like, what? And next thing you know, my mom had this bandana and she would go to her room, grab it, put it around her neck, and you knew that you upsetted her, and she would go then all of a sudden to the refrigerator and get Tylenol and be like, I think something's happening to my heart. And for like 2-3 days, she would be in bed and I'd be like, what did I do? I'm sorry. You know? So that was the running joke. So, you know, now when I have kids, sometimes I'll do that and I'll be like, do you remember what you put me through? Where you just kind of wrap your head and take valerian and tell me that, you know, my questions upsetted you, or, you know. So she had like ways to get me to feel guilty for the things they asked her.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, that's interesting. Anybody else have a story about that that you feel is uniquely your mother?
My mom Oh, the tissues. Most of you know that my mom would key in on the one thing that you were really, really good at. And she would nurture that in you. But no matter who, and she was very resourceful. Like everybody that I know loved her cooking, and my dad was always really impressed that one night we had, like, it was like the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, where she had like 1 can of tuna and 10 people for dinner. And we had the best meal because she would do stuff like, you know, cream tuna. And I mean, we didn't even have to eat like popsicles or anything. Like, it was a real meal. She would do that. But the funny thing about my mom was that she was thrilled about passing on information. And she loved trivia. She and my husband would always play, and she loved reading. And actually, she started a library for my school. But I mean, she would just like those special things. She learned how to fold a fitted sheet when she was a young married woman, and she taught everyone to fold a fitted sheet with success. And I'm telling you, after she died, I learned a new technique that she would have absolutely loved. I'm like, dang it, I can't show her this thing, similar to yours, Mom, but she would have just like loved that. And so just those things, she just loved to know these little things that she could share and pass on and delight people with. And that's just, oh, I loved it. So that's my favorite memory.
Oh, that's great, Mary. And sometimes it's those little things, you know.
Mm-hmm. Mary, you need to share us your technique. I'd like to know.
We can do that on Strength of Community, because I can make them flat and yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful. And it brings to mind too, like the stories that we tell our kids about our moms. And, you know, like I still know like my dad's story about his mom, about, you know, growing up in Carson City, Nevada, and how she would, they were very, very poor, and she would, every apartment that they moved into, she would redecorate the whole thing. She'd put up wallpaper and she'd make it beautiful. And he always thought that they lived in like these like incredibly beautiful places. And then after a few years, the landlord would see how nice the place looked and raise the rent on them. And this is like a story about my grandmother that my dad like loves to share. And now you know, it's these stories are wonderful because they kind of keep going through the generations. Does anyone have any interesting advice that your mom gave you that you would like to share with the group?
Some advice my mom gave me. One was, if you don't have anything nice to say about someone, then don't say anything at all. And another one was to leave a place better than you found it. Now, I don't know if that's, you know, specific to my mom or if that's a Girl Scout slogan that my mom said, but I definitely feel like that is still in practice, probably to the vein of sales workers, where I put away the clothes I try on.
Yes, I can attest to that. Michelle definitely lives by these edicts. So.
To Michelle's mother's point, my mother would say, if you have to look to the left and look to the right before you say something, you probably shouldn't.
My mom used to say to me when I was younger, she made me do a lot of things that I didn't want to do. I was a really shy kid, and she really pushed me forward and forced me to do a lot of things that were uncomfortable to me. And at the time, it was hard, and at the time, it hurt that I was being pushed. But she would say to me, "You'll thank me when you're older." And I'm eternally grateful for how much she pushed me. I would not be the person I am today had she not taught me to be brave.
That, you know, that reminds me of Peggy's story too. You know, sometimes mother knows best, right? So Mike is asking, is there a piece of wisdom that you learned from your mom that you pass on to your kids?
My mother was always grateful for every little thing. She was a simple woman. And one of the great pleasures that I had watching her, I had gone to Tokyo, and I bought her a string of pearls. And she had just, got up for the day, was in her house dress. And I opened up the box, and the look on her face, I can still see it. And she was just so grateful, and tears, coming down. And she says, "You shouldn't have done this. I'm not, that type of person that would wear, beautiful pearls like these." And I said, "Mother, you wear them to the grocery store, you wear them to church," and she did. She did.
Oh, that's amazing.
She did, and she just loved them, and she cherished them. And then I got her earrings at another time to match. So she was a grateful person, just so grateful of everything that happened.
Oh, that's beautiful. Anybody else have a piece of wisdom that you learned from your mom that you have passed on either to your own children or to, if you don't have kids, the next generation, or to people that you've mentored?
Well, I'll add one comment. All of you are, I think, too young, maybe except for Peggy, to understand just how important it was to be a Pan Am attendant. Pan Am was the premier airline throughout the world. And you didn't get a job with Pan Am just because you showed up.
Thank you.
So Donna deserves a lot of whatever there is in getting the job and working for Pan Am for that number of years.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm still blown away by the fact that you took that job without ever having flown before. Like that's just amazing to me. And that you were, not just that, but I think you told me that you were afraid of flying.
Yeah. I don't have white knuckles, but I swear I did that trip.
Right. But yeah, I think our mothers teach us a lot about, like, what are you capable of, and kind of pushing you beyond what you think you're capable of. I certainly have seen that in my own mother. I remember when she was diagnosed with breast cancer, she was sad for like a minute, and then she steeled herself, and she decided she was going to fight this with everything she had. And she started going to the gym while she was getting chemo. And she would go to the gym like every day, and she completely changed her diet, and she fought it on every front. And that was a big lesson to me in sort of terms of how to approach hardship. Does anybody else have something they learned from their own mother's struggles?
I think for me it was just never give up, just keep going, never give up. No matter what obstacles come your way, just keep going. So, and I do that with my daughter and my son. They're young, but I always tell them, don't give up, just try. Even if something's hard or your schoolwork is hard, you have to try. So at least you can say, I tried, but if you don't try, then that's when you failed. So you have to try. And that's something that I've seen in my mom, and she's taught that to us.
I wanted to tell you about, I have a son who has been handicapped since birth. And my mother has been a very big helper in my life with this particular child. After she raised 8 children of her own and went back to teaching school, she was still very much interested in my son, and she would take him for certain periods, particularly in the summer, to give me a break. She'd say, I'll take him home with me, and I'll take him places, and she would take him to the park, and she'd take him places where he could have some fun, and places they could go out to eat once in a while, because she knew that I had several other children still at home. And so she was helping me out that way. And he really loved having her shower all her attention on him for these short periods of time.
Yeah, that relationship, the grandparent relationship, I think is so important. I've certainly seen that in the last year with my, grandparents have been helping us out a lot with my 7-year-old. Even on Zoom, they have been teaching him classes, playing chess with him, and it's just such an important relationship. Peggy, I think, you know, you told me when we spoke before about your son and how your other children also kind of helped with your son, which I thought was so interesting because you sort of did the same thing in your family too. You took care of younger siblings.
Yes.
Yeah. And that seems to be like maybe another value that was passed on from your mother.
Mm-hmm.
I had a question for anybody, actually, anybody. Is there a trait of your mother's that you hope you have yourself?
It's a great question. Beta.
Hi.
Hi.
My mom is in this call. Hello, Mom. My mom is Jen, and I hope to have, I feel like she embraces herself with all of her being, and I hope to also accept and embrace myself for everything that I am. I'm not the most confident in myself, and I feel like I lack in a lot of aspects of my life. But I've seen my mom overcome her own obstacles with everything that she's got, and I hope that I have that same energy.
Yay. That was
Where's
beautiful,
my
Beta.
tissue?
Okay, we got tissues. I'm handing tissues over the cubicle wall right now. Okay, here's a tissue coming your way. Thank you, everybody. We're just about at 4 o'clock, and so we need to wrap it up, but I just wanted to say thank you to everybody for coming today and for sharing your stories. A huge thank you to our featured guests. It was just lovely to hear everyone's stories, so thank you so much, and we will see you next month.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.